Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome back to our live session 3 of this instructor-assisted e-learning course, Introduction to International Migration Statistics, tailored to the Maldives context. So we're kind of at the halfway point here. This is our third live session. We've at this point should have finished the first 3 modules. So hopefully everyone has been able to keep up with the e-learning, and of course we'll do a short recap of the most recent module today. And we also have a guest speaker, a very exciting presentation from Ms. Julibeth Rodriguez Leon, who is with us today as well from INE Chile. So let me just go quickly through the agenda. So as I mentioned, first we'll do the recap, and then we'll have our expert talk from Julibeth, and then we'll have presentations from the Ministry of Economic Development and the Maldives Immigration Authority on their migration data and systems. So they'll present and we'll be able to ask questions of each other and kind of have a more open discussion about the different data systems, the different needs that we have. So hopefully that'll be more of like an interactive discussion there. And as I mentioned, so we are currently kind of midway through the course, and our live session 3, as you can see here, is in week 5, and we have another 6 weeks to go. So following this, we will have 2 weeks during which you will be following along with modules 4 and 5, the 2 final modules in the e-learning, which will be focusing on the measuring international migration through the population censuses. There's a module on immigration and a module on immigration. And then we will dive into our group project. So we'll tell you more about that as we near that period. So just to give you a recap of what we saw in module 3, hopefully you have been able to follow along. Basically, we examined the different sources of international migration and temporary mobility statistics, and we looked at the different advantages and disadvantages of each. So we looked at traditional data sources, such as population censuses, surveys, as well as administrative sources. And we also touched on the role of alternative sources of data, including big data. So I guess the overarching takeaway is whichever source we're using, or when we're using multiple sources, we're always striving for reliability, timeliness, and comparability of our statistics. So we should be paying attention to the consistency of our different concepts and definitions that are employed in the various sources. And of course, always considering privacy and ethical issues, human rights considerations, particularly since we're dealing with what could be potentially vulnerable migrant populations. And of course, when we look at traditional data sources, we're looking at population censuses, surveys, and administrative data, which also includes population registers or registers of foreigners. And so, of course, Module 3 goes much further into depth on each of these and their advantages and disadvantages, but I'll just kind of do a quick overview of what's in the module here. So our first source of traditional data source is the population census. So in many countries, this is the single reliable source of information on international migrants, specifically migrant stocks. So the census collects comprehensive demographic information on each person, and it also allows cross-tabulations across the different characteristics that are collected in the data. The census allows countries flexibility of deciding which topics to include in the questionnaire. Generally, data on the place of birth, foreign citizenship, previous place of residence is collected, but other aspects can also be captured, including reasons for migration, place of birth of parents, etc. And of course, the main advantage of the census is that it has universal coverage, which also includes undocumented populations, which are not possible to be captured in other traditional data sources because they're not, um, they don't fall under those purview. And of course, the main disadvantage is the frequency, since the census run is basically once a decade. It's not able to capture flows, and also it could be prone to recall errors. So if you're asking about a point in time in the distant past, almost 10 years ago, a person might be making mistakes in relating that information. So that's the population census. And then there's also, of course, the surveys. So surveys can provide a wealth of very specific information on migrants, going into more detail than the census could. So we can sort of look at surveys in two types. We have household surveys or non-household surveys, which include border surveys, surveys of refugee camps, etc. And then household surveys can be further broken down into specialized surveys with a migration focus and other purpose surveys, such as your labor force survey, income and expenditure, mortality, fertility, health, etc. Or they could be integrated surveys that span a range of topics. So, of course, the specialized surveys focusing on migration are more flexible. They allow for a detailed migration information to be collected, including things like, for example, reasons for migration. And you can also use them to follow migrants over time. So, like running a longitudinal study to monitor how their situation may have changed over the years. But of course, this requires a lot of resources to run. They can be quite expensive, and as a result, may not be done as frequently. And of course, they also don't have universal coverage. And then other purpose surveys are collected more frequently, and there's more of a reliable kind of collection schedule there. But because the focus is not on migration specifically, the migration-related information may be limited, and also the sample size would need to be quite large to try to capture a representative subset of the migrant population and the general population. And then we have population registers, which is one kind of administrative data. So in countries that have them, which of course not all countries do, population registers can be one of the best sources of comprehensive international migration data on stocks and flows, provided that, of course, there's compliance with registration and deregistration rules. So they generally capture data on births and deaths, movements, change of residence, basic demographic data. But of course, it's quite sort of challenging to achieve a smooth and robust registration and deregistration process. So, for example, for deregistration, especially, it's kind of hard to keep track because people might just leave the country and skip the deregistration step, and you wouldn't know that they've left. So that can result in an undercount with regard to immigration in particular. And then in terms of other administrative data sources, that includes, of course, data produced by a range of ministries and agencies. So we have two entities here today with us. So we'll hear more about the administrative data produced by the Ministry of Economic Development and Maldives Immigration. But also it can include, of course, health records, school records, etc. And so certain kinds of administrative data can be used to produce migration flow statistics. So, for example, border control entries and exits, the granting of residency permits, work permits, things like that. And these records can provide information on the characteristics of different migrant subgroups. And of course, one challenge with admin data is that it generally captures events rather than persons. So, for example, the same person could get different permits when they're changing their status in the country, and that would come up as, different instances or different events, but it's the same person, and so it's a challenge to kind of reconcile those two. And then, of course, we have the non-traditional data sources. So that's kind of the leading edge so far. We're still working on how to best harness these. So big data is, of course, on everyone's mind. And we can use non-traditional data sources to fill gaps in the traditional data sources and methods. They can provide us with more timely data. So, for example, we can analyze social media for sentiment on migration. We can facilitate the analysis of temporary mobility with, for example, mobile phone data. And one advantage is that this carries no additional cost. So this data is just being produced as part of other processes that have that are not specifically related to the statistical production process. And you can combine the different sources of data. You can look at, let's say, satellite data with mobile phone data together. But of course, there's also a number of challenges. Privacy is of course a concern that is to be dealt with in different ways that maybe we're not used to with relation to traditional data sources. In the case of social media, for example, we can run into bias where who is responding, what kind of data are we getting, and what sentiment is more frequently expressed in social media. So it could be, your extremes, for example. And then we can also run into inconsistency of concepts and definitions across the different sets of alternative data. And of course, data access issues. So for example, getting the data from the providers, if it's a private provider, such as a mobile phone operator, there might be issues with that, and how do we gain access to this sort of thing. So that's just a very quick recap of what we looked at in module 3. And are there any questions? Is there any kind of feedback so far, maybe on the course itself, the pace of it? How do we feel so far? Because everybody, I've sort of been monitoring in the background, and some people have sprinted ahead, and others are, maybe a little bit slower on the uptake. So just wondering how it's going for those of you that are here with us today. I'm going to take silence as
there is a hand, Elena, from Fatima Villasa.
Yes, please go ahead. Maybe it was an accidental hand. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was actually wondering about the numbers that you would get from these different statistics, and how you would present it when you are disseminating the results, because from the count that you get from the census might differ from the records you get from the administrative data. So any disclosure on that as such when publishing those numbers, and just wanted to know the kind of information that is included in migration specific survey as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I don't know, Maria Isabel, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you, Villasa, for the question. It's not that common that we have different numbers from censuses compared to surveys. It happens more with register based sources. In that case, obviously, it's with migration, with any statistical data, but particularly with migration data, it's very important the component of communication, and be very, very transparent of what the MBS or the authority is publishing. It's very important to conduct a campaign, an educational campaign for the wide public, so that they can understand better. Also, we need to take into account that the numbers that are coming from the censuses, they are, of course, our base, but they are not perfect. Also, the census figures are very often adjusted for under coverage or over coverage. In particular, the migrant populations are sensitive in that sense. They are more prone to be undercovered, so that the count is not complete. What we can use with the registers is that we complement and we benchmark each other. And Julibet is going to explain how they did it in Chile, but the methodology that we are recommending is that we use the census for the stocks and the admin registers for the flows, and we can add or subtract the people that go out or come in, so that you end up with another stock at a later point in time. For the surveys, it is a little bit easier in the way that you will not be publishing the same data. The surveys are more for knowing the characteristics of the migrants. You have a lot of sampling challenges for the surveys. If you do a targeted survey for the migrants, it means that you already know more or less where they are and how you can design your sample. Perhaps you know that they are very much concentrated in certain areas, so you oversample those areas, and you try to get as many of them as you can. If you do a blanket sample in the whole territory of the country, you may miss a lot of them. So you need to do a particular sampling strategies so that you get them. If you do a specialized survey, if you attach a module on migration on a regular survey, let's say a health and demographic survey or a labor force survey, then you don't have control of the sampling strategy, and you have to deal with that fact. And the information that you can collect is not as targeted. It's more for comparing characteristics between migrant and non-migrant population. I hope I gave a little light on that, Trijasa. I'm happy to keep discussing on this.
Thank you. Actually. Yeah, that clears a bit about how I understand migration statistics as well. So thank you.
Are there any other questions before we move to our expert talk?
Yeah, can I ask something?
Yes, please.
When I read through the module 3, I just came across that for specialized migration surveys, it can be conducted simultaneously in the both in the sending country and the receiving country. Is it done in any other countries, and how is it coordinated within the two countries?
There are very few examples of that, but there are a few that coordinate, particularly at the border. So, for example, in a few, they're not normally nationally they're not nationally done. They're very focused on the border areas, and they coordinate between both sides of the area to understand. That is more for temporary mobility, though. It's targeted to measure and see the characteristics of people that come and go often, let's say every day or every week. They might work on one side and live on the other side. That is the most common practice. Then there are a few other countries. There's one example in I think in ECOWAS, in the ECOWAS region of Africa, they have this intergovernmental body, and they do coordinate, not among two, but I think there are 7 countries in that economic community. They do coordinate. They do at the same time the same survey with the same questions, and they put a lot. Most of their migration is interregional, so they put a lot of effort and focus on understanding the migrants coming from the neighboring countries. That is done. It obviously takes a lot of coordination and in terms of capacity and also in terms of resources, but it's not impossible. It is being done.
I see. Thank you.
Shahuda, please comment.
Thank you. I'm also wondering, like, because we have the population census, and then if we have some information on the people who are coming, mostly because we have these migrant workers, yeah. So if we have the administrative data from on the people who have come to the country under a certain employer or for place, like, is it something that we can use to select a sample and then maybe look at the characteristics at the industry level or something like that? Because
Yes,
other than that,
definitely.
yeah, difficult to find the same people. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. For that, you would need to leverage the registers that are in maybe in the labor ministry and the Ministry of Economic Development, because they have the registers of the work permits, and in the work permits, the information about where the people are working has to appear. So in that sense, you can conduct a targeted survey in the places, in the resorts or the construction sites where you know that most migrants are located.
Thank you. And if, like, for example, if they are not, if they come for a certain employer, but when we look at the people who are there, and then the person has changed to another place, so we can use this information also to adjust. I mean, the location, the accuracy of this location data as well. Yeah, because we
Yes,
find
but
that
that
people are changing all the time.
and they don't have to register when they change.
Maybe after the the
Mhm.
MPD presentation, we can
For
see how
that,
it
I
works.
think a longitudinal study would be necessary. Otherwise, it's very difficult that you really follow them, because you go to a place when they say they are registered and then they're not there anymore. And if they are not obliged to register where they move, how can you know? Unless you wait for a period and, as you say, they register in the new place after the fact.
Okay, as long as they don't leave the country, then we can still assume that the international migrant is in the country. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And particularly in your case, because it's an island, it's more or less easy to control when they are out. And if you want to investigate the trajectories within, I think that a longitudinal study would be sort of the only way to really follow them. So you have the list of the permits, and you sample on them. So you really, from your universe, you have a subsample, and for those that you have sampled, you follow them, let's say, for a whole year. I don't know how often they move. They move more often than once a year, right?
Maybe it's not a change as such, but if they move within the country for different projects, then there may, do you consider a certain period of time to consider this as a move, or otherwise it will still be an international migrant? Yeah.
Yes.
Vyasa, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, it's a follow-up question to the answer that Maria Isabella gave me. You mentioned that census is more to take the stock of the migrant population, and the administrative data can be used to determine the flow of the migrant population, right? I was wondering that in the census, we also do ask how long they have been in the country as well. So can this information be used as well to determine, to kind of estimate the flow of migrants coming into the country and determine the uh, sort of as a migration factor? The reason why I'm asking this is because we are soon going to embark on doing our population projection, and we need to come up with the migration factor for the international migrants as well. So what would be the best sources in such cases? And just thinking out loud.
Yeah. Yes, you can use that question, but honestly, it's not that useful. The more useful question, I don't know whether you have it in your census, is when you ask, where were you living 1 year ago? Or when were you living 5 years ago? With that, you can sort of estimate the flows in the past 5 years or in the past 1 year. The 1 year is the more accurate one that you can use. But for how long have you been here is more for characterizing the migrants than for estimating any flows. Do you have that
Okay.
question in your census?
Well, we actually have the duration question, and unfortunately, we did not ask from them how long, I mean, where they were 1 year
Okay.
ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But from the duration question, we know for an international migrant how long they have been in the country, actually. And what we are missing out is actually the internal movements of the migrant population from the census.
Yes. No, the movements cannot be captured in the census. You really need to use the registers.
Okay, thank
If
you.
you can study the registers, let's say for the last 3 years or so, you might be able to identify the levels and the patterns. And if the economic conditions hold, it might be safe to assume that more or less the patterns will be replicated in the future, which can help you to do the projections.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's another hand. Shahuda.
I'm just wondering why we cannot assume. We thought that if they are here for 2 years, if we take the number of years, then maybe we can more accurately estimate the duration. So I'm
Yes,
just
you can
thinking.
use it. You can use it. It's not so accurate. You can use the a year ago, or duration of 1 year, or duration of
Yeah.
2 years also. But anything older than that, it gets very inaccurate. People don't remember that much.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think it's time for our expert.
Yes, so just to introduce Julie Beth. So she's a sociologist specializing in demography, over a decade of experience in statistical offices, focusing on population and housing censuses, as well as social research methodologies. And currently she leads the coordination of the design, implementation, and analysis of migration statistics in Chile's National Statistics Institute. So please go ahead, Juliet. I am going to project your presentation. So,
Thank you, Elena, for the introduction. While you're charging the presentation, maybe I want to thank you for the invitation and for all of you sharing this moment with me. Today I'm going to, sorry, did you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Today I'm going to briefly show you how we use administrative records in our recent estimates of the number of foreigners residing in Chile, which is a task we undertake with since 2019 with the National Migration Service, which this institution is part of the Ministry of Interior. Next, please. I think going down, or I don't know if I'm not seeing it or it's not moving.
No, it's not moving, Julie.
Okay. But maybe I think you can go in view and full screen, and then you can pass slide just like PowerPoint.
Yeah, I am in full screen, unfortunately. Maybe I'll exit full screen.
You see it full screen, but we don't. Maybe.
Do you see the second slide now?
No.
Still no. Let me try to unshare.
Maybe try unshare and share again.
I'm just going to share the screen, and then hopefully I'll just move the PowerPoint there and it will work. Do you see it now?
Yes, it's not in full screen.
Now,
Yeah.
Yes.
screen.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so my presentation today is divided in 4 topics. First, a little bit of context about immigration in Chile. Then the methodology that we use in our estimate, some figures or results, and finally the challenges and opportunities by making these statistics. Next, please. I'm going to be a little bit of echo of Elena and Marisabel because I was hearing what they said before, and yes, well, as a probably you are all already know, the sources or the main sources for measuring immigration in Chile, for example, as in many other countries, are 3: population and houses censuses, household surveys, and administrative records. But the census is a snapshot that cannot be modified, and in Chile particularly, this source of information focus on those migrants who were born abroad. This is the only variable to define migrants in Chile. In the case of surveys, in Chile, there is not an official survey that is specifically focused on migration, and the existing surveys that somehow address this topic are not designed to respond to the diversity of the migrants in the territory. Administrative records usually provide information on administrative events rather than on people, because a single person may have a multiple administrative acts or records. Next, please. So historically, the population and houses censuses has been the main source of information for measuring immigration in Chile. And the graph shows that the proportion of migrants, for example, decreased between 1907 and 1982. So in the 80s, therefore, international immigration wasn't a very important issue for our country. And also in 2012, a population and houses census was conducted, but it was considered invalid by a national commission, and that is why you can see it in the graph. But I measure because of the length of time since the last valid census in 2002. Another census was carried out in 2017, but with reduced objectives and questions. And by the time of the 2017 census, a significant increase in immigration had been observed reaching 4.4% of the total resident population, which was a level of immigration that had not been seen since 1907. So next, please. So after the census, there was also a significant increase in international immigration, because if you see the red star in both charts marks the month of the 2017 census, which was April. And on the left, we can see that the balance between entries to and exits the country from the up to 2014 was mostly negative. Since that year, many people who enter the country for tourism purposes change their status and apply for a resident permit. And in the graph on the right shows the application for resident permits within the national territory. And as you can see in both graphs, most of the increases were after 2017. And also in 2018, there were at least three official figures of the stock of immigrants. One was from the census, another for the socioeconomic characterization survey, and other from the Ministry of Interior, which generate institutional mistrust. So this situation led us to the assumption that the 2017 census had become outdated in terms of measuring the total number of foreigners or foreign-born population residing in Chile. Next, please. So given the recent increase in immigration in Chile, the issue increased rapidly in political significance. And all of these circumstances led us to the creation of an institutional organization of coordination with the objective of providing a new one and only official figure of the migrants population. So now we are going to see some of the main sources and the institutions that participate in our estimate. First, we have the visa application records that are processing inside the country by the National Migration Service, CERMIC by its Spanish acronym, which is of Ministry of Interior. We also have visa application records that are processed outside the country at consulates and embassies. This is the institution in charge of managing this visa is MINREL, which is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On the other hand, we have the entries into or exits to regular crossings that are handled by the investigation police, which is PDI. And for some records that lack of address information, we also use a residence record of PDI. Finally, from the civil registry, we have the unique identification number that are given to all residents in Chile, and we also have the death records. Next, please. So speaking a little bit more about administrative record, I think is important for this course maybe to emphasize this definition of that a register aims to be a complete list of objects in a specific group of objects or population. So we need to transform a administrative record into a statistical record. And for that, we need identities. So the identities used in register processing can either be identification numbers that are unique within a national administrative system, or an identification number in a subsystem with keys to identities in other system, or it is possible to use such identification variable as name, address, date of birth, or place of birth. So these identities will be used in an exact matching of the objects in different registers with the aim to find identical or related objects in two or more registers. Next, please. So what did we do? What we did was to first initiate institutional coordination among the four institutions involved in the migratory flow and the National Statistic Office. We decide to keep the census as the basis of our estimate, but to adjust it by the under coverage or omission, the census omission, and for the aging of the population. And we also added the information contained in the administrative record who entered the country after the census, while subtracting those who were outside the country or who have died during the period of the estimate. At the macro level, our methodology includes adding the information from census to information from administrative records that are created after the census. And at the micro level, the data is integrated based on record linkage or statistical matching of individual level records using key identification variables. We cannot link the census with the administrative record at the micro level because our census doesn't ask for identifying number such as the room, which is our variable, the name of our identification number, room. And furthermore, the names that are provided in census are only used by for the purpose of organization of the field operation. And once the operation is end or finished, the names are deleted of the databases in accordance with confidentiality policies. So next, please. So the main variable to generate identification keys vary depending on the databases of the institution that are being processed. For example, the migration service database has its own key or code that they assign to each person who carries out a procedure, an administrative procedure with them. The variable is called foreign code. But for example, in many state databases, the variable most used is the room, which I already mentioned, that is a unique identification number that is provided or granted to all Chilean citizens, whether or not they live in the country. And in the case of foreigners, it's granted only to those who have a resident permit, whether temporary or permanent. Due to the above, three situations can occur. One, the person doesn't have a room when they do the first procedure with CERMIC or MINREL, but they are or they give other identification variables such as passport. Two, the person has renewed their permission or their permit or has several procedures with CERMIC or MINREL, so they already provide a room. Or three, the person doesn't have a resident permit and they are not in CERMIC or MINREL databases, so they are in an irregular status. But maybe they can be in other services databases, for example, health or education. But these people is more difficult to identify for us because our methodology center of focus in CERMIC and MINREL databases. So these people are currently outside our estimates. Next, please. So with the purpose of consolidating a single database for foreigners who may be in Chilean territory, the database of consular visas granted by MINREL and the database of resident permits requested in Chile by CERMIC are united in a large database where the unit of analysis is people, persons. So since a foreigner could be in both databases, the unification goes through a treatment of eliminating all the duplicate repeated rows per person, obtaining one person per row. And to give an example between these two databases, just with the exact combination of full name, date of birth, and country of origin, 94.5% of the data are linked. But there are other possible combinations using as you can see, passport numbers, surnames, etc. If we want to be more generate more deduplication. Next, please. So after having the one single database that combines CERMIC and MIREL information, those who have died are subtracted, and this is done by the matching of the death records of civil registry by using the variable run. And then this database is sent to PDI so they can add the variables of movement direction, which if is entry or exit, and the last date and the day of the last movement, and all for every estimation we filter as of December 31st of each year. And for linking processing, the PDI analyst generates an identification algorithm that includes any identification number and adds variables such as surnames, first names, and date of birth. And for the 2021 estimates, the level of matching between this database combined and the PDI is close to 90%. I want to tell you about a little bit more about how we add or subtract a person, whether the data source. So for example, in the diagram on the left, you can see that the cases that we are added or subtracted, depending of whether they come. So in both cases, if it's an identified entry, we add the person. And if it's an exit, we subtract them. But when CERMIC visas that are requested within the country do not match with border control information, these persons are added because the visa application itself is an indication that the person was in the country. But when a MINREL visa doesn't match with information from border control, these persons are not added, is not added to the estimate because they will be not evidence that these people who apply for a resident permit outside the country have entered the country. Next, please. So the consolidated information from administrative record is added to the census at macro level, as I said before, and according to variables such as sex, age group, country of birth or nationality, and place of residence. And as you can see in table 2, the administrative record component includes nearly 700,000 people, making up 47% of the total estimate. For 2022, we're expecting this percentage increase. In 2021, there were at least a total of 1.5 million foreigners residing in Chile, representing about 7% of the total resident population. Next, please. Now we're going to see how the composition of migrants changes when we incorporate administrative records to census. The census data show that the majority of immigrants were female, but later, the post-census administrative records indicate that there were a greater number of men, representing 54% of the total information in records. Or for example, regarding the country of birth or nationality, the 2017 census revealed new countries in immigration flows, which with the appearance of countries such as Colombia, Haiti, and Venezuela, following the main historical flows from the border control border countries such as Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina. However, the post-census administrative record captured a significant increase in Venezuelan immigration. So approximately 80% of the information of migrants from Venezuela came from administrative records information. So by adding census plus the records, the Venezuelans became the largest migrant group in the country, representing almost a little bit more of 30% of the estimate total in 2021. Next, please. As for regional habitual residents, despite the fact that the majority of migrants continue to be concentrated in the metropolitan region and in the north of the country, the information for administrative records show an increase in the proportion of migrants in regions of the center and south of the country. So in the map, the regions in light blue represent those where the census information has the greater proportion over the estimate total, while the regions painted in dark blue are those where the post-census record have a greater proportion of information. And if you look, there are new regions painting in dark blue. By the 2021 estimate, the information from records for some of those are 2 times greater than the population of immigrants whose information comes from census. So using an estimation methodology that combines census and administrative record, it was possible to have updated information on migrants within the national territory. Next, please. Talking a little bit more about our challenges in this estimate. First, our estimation has some limitations. For example, when we work with 5-year age groups, and therefore, if we want to study migrants that are children and adolescents, we cannot construct the 0 to 17 age years old group. So we have to work with the people who is 0 to 19 years, for example. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, information sources have different ways to define the migrant. So the census use country of birth, and administrative records use citizenship, or in our case, we use the word nationality. Therefore, although we know that they are different, this variable, this question, we must assume that they are equivalent or alike to be able to add both databases. In regard of place of residence, we must assume that the people continue to live, or whether they declare at the time of the census, or whether they declare at the time of the application in the administrative registry. Also, there are some dimensions of irregularity that we have not been able to address. For example, people who are not applicants of resident permit within with whether CERMIC or MINREL. So maybe this person are still in the country and are in other databases. And finally, the methodology has its scope, a demographic count and characterization with variable of sex, age, country, and place of residence, but it cannot take care of a more extensive socioeconomic characterization, such as that's provided by censuses or surveys or records themselves. Next, please. For the issue of irregularity, in the 2022 estimate, which we will publish in coming days, I think this week or next week, we have been able to incorporate 2 situations that were not in the past. First, we incorporate those migrants who enter the country through irregular or clandestine crossings, have some records, but in police report records that are managed by PDI, and they do not have a resident permit request in CERMIC or MINREL. And 2, we are adding those migrants who enter with a tourism purpose, who ask for a extension, and the extension expired. And as the day of the estimate, they have not a request of a resident permit, and they they haven't left the country. So we are adding these two dimensions of irregularity. And the complex or the problem with this type of record is the integration challenges, because these records lack of basic information. This record, none of them have numerical identification such as RUN. Many of them lack of passport or identification variable. So we have to use variables such as name, full name, date of birth, country of origin, etc. Next, please. Ending my presentation, I'm in the last slide. I want to refer to the window of opportunities that we have regarding migration statistics in our country. Because regarding besides the limitation, we are very proud of having this number and this coordination of institutions. So first we have this coordination, this with it initiate, the reason we initiate this coordination was for carrying out this estimate. But now we have a table or a committee that meets periodically to discuss line of works, generate activities where progress and individual work on migration data is are shared. So we are proud of having this table. And recently, in 2021, in Chile, a new migration law was enacted, which in terms of management provides a definition of migratory categories, but also points out two guidelines that will have an impact in the future of statistical information as a source of information, because the law says that we must, well, the state must construct a registry of Chileans residing abroad, which is in charge of MINREL, and a registry of foreigners residing in Chile, which is in charge of CERNIC. And at the institutional level, we are developing a strategic project, which is the design of a statistical population registry by combining several administrative records. Also, next year, we're going to have our population and houses censuses, in which we hope to incorporate the nationality variable, because the 2017 census only asks for place of birth. So we hope to analyze, together with the country of birth variable, the 4 possible subpopulations that are recommended by UN, which are population of foreign-born citizens, foreign-born non-citizens, native-born non-citizen, and native-born uncitizen population. We hope our census goes well, and we can do this type of analysis. And finally, it is a great opportunity for us to participate in international events, all kinds of events, and group of experts. For example, the expert group of migration from the UN, or the IDAC with UNICEF, the CLAD conference, seminars, because the knowledge is collective, enriched. Migration issues are strengthening with the sorry. I think it's important participating in all this kind of event, because the topic gains more weight, more importance, and we can share collective or knowledges. So with that, I think, I don't know what time is it, but I end my presentation. I look forward for your questions.
Thank you so much, Julia Beth. That was very, very interesting presentation. Certainly a lot of work done by INE, a lot of coordination, and a great example to follow. Do we have any questions from our participants? It was a very dense, a lot of things to process.
If I may.
Yes, please go ahead.
First of all, Julie Beth, thank you for the presentation. It was quite impressive, and congratulations on the work that has been done so far. And I feel this is something that we could also start working on with the agencies that is present here in this webinar. Just a couple of questions to understand better how the process went about in using the administrative data. My first question is like the frequency in which you do the linkages with the different administrative registers. Is it on an annual basis or quarterly? My second question is something which you have also highlighted in your challenges. That's regard to the undocumented workers, foreign workers in the country. So, do you do any sort of estimations when you bring out these results from the administrator to document for these migrant workers? Thank you.
I don't know if there is other question, or I start with these two because I see hands.
Tisha Hood also has her hand up. Jehu, did you want to come in?
Should I ask to wait for the answer and then ask later?
Go ahead and ask. I think Julie Beth has been noting down the questions.
Well, maybe I start with the two that they made already. Well, about the frequency of linking, well, we every year make these estimates. We are like 2 years, I think. I don't know if the word is updated, or I don't know the word in English, but we wait until the year has passed, and they consolidate one database of every year. So one time of the year, CERMI is really the institution that has the interoperative leadership of compiling the administrative records. So they do many procedures depending of the institution of the databases that are being processed. For example, in between CERMIC and MINREL that are the visa applications, I think it's just one procedure to add in these databases. But when they want to link with border control, they have a little bit more difficulties, so they have to work with the PDI analyst and do many process until getting just one database that have information for many people of this, because not all of the records, every row has matching with the border control. So they want to has as many information as possible. So for that is a little bit longer process. I don't know if this with this I answered your question. I don't know if I understand it all well, but maybe then you can ask me more about what you are interested on, and about irregular status of our migrants. In past estimates, we know we have some kind of irregularity in our estimate, but it wasn't possible to identify these migrants in the databases, because the census component has some irregularity because the census doesn't ask for any type of migratory condition. So we assume that we until 2017 we have all migrants, the stock of migrants, but we don't ask for its status. And then in administrative records, because irregularity is a very complex concept, we know that we have maybe, for example, that kind of irregularity that is when your permit is expired and you're still in the country and you haven't made another request, for example. But the new methodology that we are implementing in 2022 estimate is because of the basis of our estimation in administrative record component is those migrants who has applied for a resident permit in CERMIC or MINRED. And the new stuff is that there are some migrants that increase a lot from 2021 and on, is that we know that in the country are migrants that enter the country by irregular crossings, so they are not in the database of border control, and they are not in the database of resident permit applicants. So, but PDI has a record when a person maybe self-report or they are making some kind of a delete or something like that, and they have that kind of register of records, and with CERMIC take that information and first they link with its information, maybe in order to capture if there is somehow the person is repeated in both databases, which they mostly are not. And the other kind of irregularity is what I said, is people who says to you that they are going to be tourists, but then they stay in the country. When they ask for a extension, they are not irregular. They ask for a permission. But when when the extensions expire, and we can look for them in the border control when they have not left the country, so they have 6 months or more in the country. We consider them as a residence, so we need to add them. And now we are going to publish in our database these two types of irregularity are going to be visible somehow, so you can have a little bit more an estimate of irregularity in self, but just for those for this type of irregularity, not all kind of irregularity. Yes, I don't know if
Thank you so much, Julie Beth. Just being cognizant of the time. I know we have still a couple more presentations, so maybe we can go ahead with the next presentations from Ministry of Economic Development and Maldives Immigration. And then if there's any follow-up questions, maybe they can also be addressed by email, or you can put them on the forum. Anyway, we're here. Feel free to contact us and Julie Beth as well. So maybe we can switch to Ministry of Economic Development. And Julie Beth has posted her email address in the chat, so you can reach out to her as well. Mr. Hussein Arusham?
Hello. I don't think I have the
Yes,
role
one
to
second.
present with him.
Make a presenter.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I don't see anything on the screen so
Yeah,
far.
I'm just pushing it
Okay.
down. Can you see now?
Yes.
One small thing before we start.
Mhm.
The Ministry of Economic Development had the mandate for employment expectorate management previously, but now we have been changed to Ministry of Homeland Security and Technology. So we are under a new ministry and ongoing.
Okay. For the clarification. I think you muted, Hossein.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so one small thing before we start, the Ministry of Economic Development only had the mandate previously. Now it has been changed to Ministry of Homeland Security and Technology. So we are in an ongoing process of change. Uh, Currently, these works are not under the Ministry of Economic Development.
Okay.
Right. So at the employment registration section, that is the name of the section that is currently managing the expatriate system, which is the expat system. So we'll just go through a bit of what are the data we collect and what are the reasons as it has been highlighted to us. So when we look at the type of data we collect in major categories, it is the work site where an expatriate employee will be working at, quota which is issued to per employer, uh, specifying a max limit on specific works, work permit, a permit given to a foreign expatriate workers to work in the Maldives for specified duration. Employers, different types of employers data that is recorded within the expat system and representatives of these employers as well. We'll go through one by one and just a brief overview of what it is and the data aspects we collect. First of all, in the process, we always collect the work site as a first means because we want to identify the locations where these workers will be working once they arrive. So in this, we try to identify what type of places are these, whether these are addresses, vessels, or other places. But previously, once when this work was being done in 2019, what we realized was it was based on IC classification, but to a level it wasn't well implemented. So we have revamped the whole classification system based on the IC revision 4 and introduced something that does fit into the context of our expect management system to ensure that we can provide data at a level that will always have a common point, which is the IC classification, where we can compare data between other agencies or as well as internationally if required in the future. So the data we collect for work sites are the first one is site type. So basically we do groupings of what type of sites do people work. These includes locations, which are physical addresses, or vessels like Safari, where people do not have a fixed location where they're traveling from one place to another. So we cannot say they are tied down to one island or one location. That's why we group these. We also group them in some other contexts, such as domestic workers are in a different group of sites, and the commercial workers are in a different group. And then in each site, we collect additional information, such as the main IC code, which is based on the IC classifications 4 digit, which is the classes. So based on this, we ask them where does their work fall in this particular site. For example, if they're doing restaurant business or bed and breakfast unit, we ask them to pick those. And after they pick the accommodation class, we then ask them specifically which type of accommodation, whether this is a bed and breakfast unit, whether this is a resort hotel, or whether this is another type of accommodation service. Just an additional expansion to identify specifically what they are doing. Then we also obtain a name as well an address. An address includes the island name, the atoll name, and if it's more specific, we go into the level of obtaining the roads and other details as well as like if it's an apartment, the floor number of the building or the apartment number as well. But we do not collect addresses for sites which are vessels because vessels, as I mentioned, and we see that they are not tied to a single location. So labeling them belonging to a single location would give us a false sense of people belonging to a specific location. We feel like that, so we have changed that in the system. In addition, we collect site attributes. These are specific data characteristics collected from a work site to describe its unique perspective. For example, I mentioned the hotel cases. One of the attributes that might be collected for this includes like the number of units in the hotel, number of local employees working there, the square feet of the place, whether how many beds they have, other information such as this, which could elaborate us more and tell us more about exactly how big or small the hotel is, or what are the services they provide, or portfolio, or just give a better understanding. Then we just collect the permits and the photos. This helps us to ensure that what the work type they have set, chosen and the attributes information they have provided to us aligns with it. For example, for in the tourism sector, they give a specific license saying this hotel has this number of beds or this number of rooms. So we can ensure that the data they provide and the data we are capturing as well are authenticated, and it's further validated with the photos ensuring this is an authentic place. Then some additional documents may be collected based on the type of work we have done. Then we also collect the financial information of these sites. We connect this data directly to the Maldives Inland Revenue Authority, MIRA, which collects the tax revenue in Maldives. So we know if a location is ongoing, whether they have stopped or uh, if they are expanding. We see this by directly connecting the activities within both systems. So if the hotel hasn't been filing their income for 3 years, or they have filed for zero revenue, then we know they have stopped working at the hotel, or uh, something of interest has occurred that we need to see whether if it's ongoing or not. So this helps us to ensure the ongoing nature of the business or not, as well as the other information we have collected. That's about it in the site perspective we collect. The next one is the quota. Uh, i- as I mentioned, quota is an upper limit on number of foreign workers. Then an employer is authorized to hire under a work permit. So this is a prerequisite for obtaining a work permit. In quota, as we have already collected so much data within the site applications or site registrations, we do not collect so much data because we just rely on those data, but enhance it only a little bit further. We identify the category of where we are issuing the quota, whether it's a government authority or commercial business, or whether it's to domestic employers of domestic households. For example, they're bringing a nanny or a domestic helper to help them in their houseworks. Then we further categorize this into quota pool divisions, which is a term we used as we didn't entirely go for the IC classification division, which is the two digits within the IC classification. Is we found that if we applied it to such an extensive level, it might be difficult to feasibly apply it in the Maldives. So we just combine some of these divisions together because of how the work is being carried out in the Maldives. It's better if we combine it, then only we'll be able to ensure that employers will also be willing to provide this data to a level that is reliable for us to use, as well as for the expatriate management system to work out in other perspective of managing it. Then we issue a specified amount, specifying that an employer's max allowed limits are these for the number of people they can bring, and per occupation how many people they could bring at a time. And the occupations are also based on the ISCO classification. I think it's the revision done in 2008, if I remember correctly. So based on that classification, we are trying to further enhance it, but we haven't been fully able to put the classifications within the system. But the base occupation are all assigned a code within the IC classification. So if we needed the data to be available for any other parties, we'll be able to provide the upper levels such as the major groups and the minor groups as well, because we have set the lowest level within the system, so we can always go up in the hierarchy of the occupation classification. And the third one is the work permits. A work permit is the in the Maldives is a document that authorizes expatriate workers to be employed within the country for a certain duration. Each permit is specific to an employer designated specific work site or sites and a job title. So on the right side, you can see the digital permit we issue. So it's a digital permit fully online. Every worker working in the Maldives will have access to this, and there's a mobile app as well supporting them to carry this in a digital way where it's more convenient and more people could store this easily without losing it as well. As for the information that we collect for work permit, the first information we collect is what is the status of employee during the time of application, whether they are outside of the Maldives or inside of the Maldives. So this way we can identify whether these people who are going to be entering, or is this a reissue of another permit to somebody who is already in the Maldives, maybe under a different employer or under a different visa as well. Then we have a category classification again based on the quota and site information we have collected, which is the commercial, domestic, government, and so on. Then we collect the individual biodata, which includes name, gender, date of birth, nationality. Then a specific occupation based on the ISCO classification is selected for each of these permits. A salary is determined by the employer. A contact number which we can use to contact the employee is provided. Passport information is also collected, which includes the number, validity, previous passport information as well. One of the main reasons for collecting the individual biodata and passport information was that the system was built initially also in a way that we can ensure that even though different permits are issued to individuals, we can always profile them as a single individual. So within the system, if person A arrives and maybe spends 1 or 2 years in the Maldives, then leaves and again comes under a new permit, these will still be profiled within the same individual data, but they will be two different permits. This way we can ensure that the duplication of permit records can be avoided in cases where we do require such information. Then we collect the permanent address, accommodation address, as well as to identify where they're from and where they're going to be staying in the Maldives. Then we make sure to get an contract or a letter of appointment, which is provided by the employer to the employee to ensure that the data provided in the system as well as their contracts do align. Medical reports are also taken to ensure that their health requirements are met as per the Maldives regulations. Qualifications and experience are recorded to a certain level. We do collect and verify it, but these data are currently not grouped or classified within the system, such as maybe within the Maldives, there's a Maldives qualification framework, but we do not use such framework or any framework within the expert system as of now. But we have already made discussions and are in the process of implementing this data to be in a more usable format so that we can also provide this data while we are providing it to public or other authorities within the government. And then each work permit will provide the allowed work sites, which means a work permit can only work at specified sites. So if person A is going to be working in the capital city, they have to register their site in the capital city. But this does not mean they are limited to only working in the capital city. They are allowed movement, but to do so, they must register the next site as well. For example, they register a site in another atoll or another island, they must register it and move. However, when this work was initially passed to the Ministry of Economic Development in 2019, a person was only allowed to work in one site, which we found was not feasible and that the data therefore was not so reliable is usually these people worked in multiple locations or were changing to different locations. This was inherently because of the nature of the work sometimes. For example, people who are doing cleaning services or pesticide services, they often may travel to other islands and provide these services. So for this, we have actually implemented a update to our regulation this year. With that, we'll be enforcing a new requirement on the employers, which will be that they have to declare which island these individuals will be working at. So if they declare, for example, the person will work in island ABC, then any site within the island ABC will be allowed for this individual to work at. So we made it not too complex for the employers, but in a way we will also be able to collect the geographical data and keep in track of these movements, as well as be able to provide this data for compliance or to local government authorities such as the island councils, so they can actually access this information and help us also ensure that this information is up to date, because they will be able to identify if these people are at the island at a local level. We have already started works with the local government authority of the Maldives in integrating this information into their systems and passing on to the local governments as well. And biometrics information are collected by Ministry of Economic Development, as well as Maldives Immigration does provide us with the biometrics information. This includes biometrics from the border entry records, as well as irregular migrant workers that apply for the regularization program within the Ministry of Economic Development at present. So during these two processes, their biometrics are either taken or updated within the expert system. Then border records are also now provided by Maldives Immigration's PICE system directly since 2021, if I remember correctly. Border records have been integrated directly with an API to the expert system. So if a person is a work permit holder, that individual's border records are now being received to the expert system. However, we haven't been fully able to integrate the PICE system to the expert system. So historical records still remain, and we are still working out the process to uh, obtain the historical record so that we could identify who is currently within Maldives and who isn't. So we can provide more clear data to the public as well as government authorities. Fourth, employers. Employers are basically in the context of expat system, those who are currently registered in the system to obtain permits. So we do not have the entire list of employers within the country, but these are specific to those who are hiring expatriate workers. We collect their name and registration number, category, registered entity state, whether they are registered, whether they are in the process of finding up or they have been deregistered. These are directly tied, linked to the government's business registration system. So in that perspective, we do have a live connection and up-to-date information. However, some information such as government entities or sports communities as well as other things are not registered within this business system. Hence, those are still maintained manually, but an ongoing process has been initiated to uh, ensure that these are recorded within a single system and available to all parties. The representatives are also collected. This is to ensure that we have somebody to communicate if the employer is unavailable, and they are often the proxy who will be dealing with the expatriates within the system as well as maybe outside. This may be some form of employees of the a company or employment agencies or individuals as well. For example, a domestic person managing or expatriate may be handing it over or delegating it to their family members. So individuals are recorded as well as representatives. There are basic information such as address, contacts, registration number is also collected. All the individuals' data is currently tied to the uh, national registry of for the individuals. So we ensure that these data aligns with all of the existing registries as well. That's almost all of the data we collect that is more relevant to the migration perspective. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that very insightful presentation. I am cognizant of the time right now, so we're already 5 minutes over time. And we still, of course, would like to see the presentation of the Maldives immigration. But I'm wondering if maybe we can move it to the next live session, if that would be possible, and that way we could have a more in-depth discussion on both presentations at that time. How do we feel about that?
Sure, we can go ahead with the presentation first.
So it's overtime. That's what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion as well to have it in the next live session.
Yeah.
Next live session. Oh,
Yeah, we can,
okay
so we
then.
can start with that in the next live session, and then we can have the discussion based on both presentations.
Okay. Okay, fine.
And okay, so I think we'll wrap up for today. Thank you so much for joining us again, and apologies for running over time. And yes, please be in touch with any questions on Julie Beth's presentation, or if you have any follow-up to the presentation that we just saw. And then we will be sending out more information upcoming about the next live session and about any other course-related matters. And for now, thank you so much. And then if maybe Shazna can stay on and we can have a short kind of logistical conversation about the upcoming sessions. If that's okay, Shazna.
Sure. Shauda.
Thank you
And
so
yeah,
much,
if anyone
everyone.
else. Thank you.
And thank you, Julie Beth, for your time. And
Yes, thank you so much, Julie Beth.
Thank you, Jolie Beth. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Shauda.
Shaju, madukoranడి.
Madhukadanda.
Ah,
It's about another project, right? Helena. Yeah.